Welcome to the session on bystander intervention, and we wanted to utilize our time as efficiently as possible. We've got a wonderful panel to talk with you today, and each panelist will be taking about 15 minutes for a brief presentation, and then we'd like to utilize the last about 15 minutes for questions from the audience. And panelists, we didn't ask, would you like people to address questions during your presentation discussion or at the end? Preference? No preference. Okay, sounds like anything is possible. So, to get things started, I'm Elva Munro, Director of Prevention and Wellness from Western Washington University. And then this is our wonderful panel. Nikki, would you do an introduction?
Yes, hi, my name is Nikki Finnestead, and I'm the Violence Prevention Coordinator at Washington State University Pullman.
Hi, I'm Katie Plewa. I'm a psychologist at Western Washington University, and I'm a Violence Prevention Specialist.
Hi, my name is Andrea Eastlick, and I'm the Assistant Director of the Wellness Center at Central Washington University, and I also serve as the Campus Violence Prevention and Response Coordinator.
Buenos dias, my name is Joel Pérez. I serve as the Dean of Students for Community Life at Seattle Pacific University, and I oversee a lot of I'm one of the deputy coordinators for Title IX.
Okay, Nikki?
Okay.
Hello, can everyone hear me? Good morning, how is everybody doing today? Great, good, okay. So I was volunteered to go first. And there is also a camera right here in my face, so I will undoubtedly do something stupid. So please bear with me as I go along this morning. Like I mentioned, I am at Washington State University in Pullman. I work out of the Health Promotion Unit at Health and Wellness Services. One of the great things about our university is that we received a Department of Justice grant to address sexual assault, dating violence, and stalking back in 2011. So because of the receipt of this grant, my position was created. So since 2012, since I've been on campus, I have been 100% funded by this grant. And exciting news for us, our grant ended on September 30th, and we were renewed, so we will have this grant through 2017 on our campus, which is very exciting. I have a job, yay. A little bit about Pullman, for those of you who are not familiar with our little area of the state. We are a campus of about 20,000 students, just under 20,000 students, a mix of undergraduate and graduate. Though we are in Washington, I think it's really important to note, if you've never been on that side of the state, to realize that we're only 7 miles away from the Idaho border, and we're only 7 miles away from the University of Idaho. So we're kind of in this really unique situation in that we have these two campuses in these quite rural areas that are only 7 miles apart from one another. It's kind of surprising to me that we do not work as closely as we could, given that we are so close together, but we have some pretty interesting dynamics going on, the differences between Washington and Idaho, even though we're only 7 miles apart. As you all know, we have branch campuses throughout the state, but I am 100% funded to do work on the Pullman campus. So that's what I'll be talking about today, what is happening on the Pullman campus. For those of you who are not familiar, we are kind of fans of football over at WSU. Go Cougs! I actually did my undergrad at a university in California, and we did not have a football team, so I was not prepared for everything that happens in Pullman. How many people have been to a football game in Pullman? Is it anything like football games anywhere? Is this just what happens at colleges? Or?
It's not quite as good as a football game here.
I set you up for that one, didn't I? Fair enough. Actually, I will say, I know that there's a rivalry and whatnot, but I think this is an amazing campus. It's beautiful here. This is the second time that I've been here, and I think it's amazing. I think it's great. I don't think I'm allowed to say that, but I'm going to say it anyway. The Bystander Intervention program that we utilize at Washington State is Green Dot. So for those of you who are not familiar with Green Dot, a little 5-minute or 2-minute summary for you. So what we know is that in our communities, on our campus community in Pullman, campuses across the country, we are overrun with these acts of violence, these behaviors that support violence, that allow violence to continue. And these are what we call the red dots on our campus. And we don't know exactly how many red dots that we have, but we know we have enough that we're sustaining some pretty high rates of sexual assault, of gender-based violence. So it's including dating violence and stalking as well. So what we want to do about that is really a reflection of the problem. And that's where our green dots come in. And these green dots are these behaviors, these actions, these choices that we can make to really let the community know that we don't support violence. These are things that bystanders can do to make it less likely that an act of violence will occur or will get worse. We have had this program on our campus since 2011. Just to give you kind of a timeline of what we did, back in 2010, we sent 3 staff members and 1 advocate from our community victim organization to a facilitator training at Central Washington. So anyone who is going to be facilitating a Green Dot program on their campus has to be certified to do so. So it's a 4-day intensive training. And our people came back to campus and said, this is great. How can we make this happen on our campus? So in 2011, we brought the Green Dot trainers who are based out of University of Kentucky. That's where this program started. We brought them to our Pullman campus. And at that time, we had 45 people go through this facilitator training. For a variety of reasons, when we actually launched our program in the fall of 2011, we had 3 people who were actually providing the training to our students. So I will highlight that when I get to the challenges portion of my presentation. In the spring of 2012, we had our student organization officially recognized as a student group on our campus. These students are really the student face of our program. They are out there helping us. They're not helping us provide programming, but they're helping us spread the word around campus. They're helping us with tabling. They're creating flyers for us. They're really kind of the ambassadors of the work that we are doing as staff members. Since then, so in the 3 or so years that we've had that program, we are averaging between 100 to 300 students who attend every semester a full day bystander training. I will break that down, what that means, in just a minute. And this past summer, we actually provided introductory Green Dot presentations to all of our incoming students. So we had 4,800 students going through a very brief introduction to bystander intervention. We know that it's incredibly essential, much like Dr. Berkowitz mentioned in his keynote, that we provide comprehensive, consistent messaging to our students. And these messages start even before the first day of class, even before someone arrives on our campus. 2 ways that we're able to do this before the first day of class. We are able to provide information during a live exclamation point, which is our summer orientation program. And we're also able to provide information during Week of Welcome. And this is the week before classes start for the fall semester, a time for everyone to move in, to engage in enrichment activities, and kind of get a sense of what life is like on the Pullman campus. So during a live, which is orientation, we have a half hour with every single incoming student. And that is where we're talking about definitions of intimate partner violence. We're talking about policies and resources. So we're really setting the stage for our students. And when they come back during Week of Welcome, that week before classes start, that is when we're offering information about bystander intervention. So we're building upon the foundation we created during summer orientation. This is time intensive. We have 4,800 incoming students. That's going to include transfer students. So what this realistically looks like for us is about 170 presentations during orientation and 60 presentations during the Week of Welcome. It requires a lot of resources, and I'll talk about that again later, how we kind of work around being such a small staff, being able to provide this information to students. I mentioned, well actually, no, I'd like to go back to this. So, Green Dot bystander training. This is one element of a Green Dot program. Programs for Green Dot can range anywhere from 30 minutes to 8 hours to an entire day. It is simply not feasible for us to reach 20,000 students with a full day of programming. And that's okay, that's not necessarily what we want to do. What we're trying to do is reach enough students, reach those students who have influence on campus, so they can be the ones to diffuse that information through their peer groups throughout the community. Because as we know, they have far more influence than I do as a staff member on campus. So with our full day training, we average somewhere around 200 students who go through this training. And this is where we build upon what we covered during Week of Welcome, during that introductory presentation. We're really identifying how to recognize what intimate partner violence looks like. Recognizing, this is incredibly essential, the obstacles that people have to intervening, how we can work around those obstacles. And there is a very heavy role play scenario component, so we're actually giving students tools and giving them the opportunity to act out these tools in the training. We have done an evaluation for the past 2 years of this program. We do an immediate pretest before the training, and we do a 3-month delayed post. Our last report came out in January of 2014. I believe we had around 350 respondents to our evaluation. And we've got some very positive information from this evaluation. We see that 75% of our attendees have told us their understanding of intimate partner violence has changed, that their motivation to intervene has increased, that they feel more competent recognizing what this violence looks like, and they actually are more likely to intervene if they see an act of violence or potential violence. So I think that's really, really promising for us when we're doing this work, to see that students are telling us they're taking something away, that their motivation, I think this is key, that their motivation is actually increasing to do something if they see something. A little bit about some of our successes and challenges on our campus. We are very fortunate that we have a high level of institutional support in the work that we're doing. Even though it's primarily myself and staff within the violence prevention programs that is offering this programming, we can't do it alone, and we have to rely on our campus partners to help us get into orientation, to help us get into Week of Welcome. We work very closely with athletics, Greek life, international programs to get our programming out to these communities. Our Department of Justice grant, I think, has been instrumental in helping us provide our programming. We have over 40 campus and community partners signed on to our MOU, and that's including the Office of the President and Vice President of Student Affairs. Service learning agreements with faculty. I want to highlight this because this has been extremely beneficial for us and our students. So we have faculty members who offer a service learning component, and essentially what this means is students have an opportunity in their course to complete a variety of projects, volunteer opportunities, or other events. And one way they can fulfill this requirement is to attend every event that we provide over the course of a semester. So it works out between 15 to 30 hours of programming, depending on the course and depending on the semester. So a lot of students are telling us that we have the most interesting opportunity, and they're working with us over these other opportunities that are presented to them. So that has been a way that we have been able to work with quite a few students, and a way that we've been able to work with them more than one time. So they're not just coming to one program, they're coming to a series of programs throughout the course of a semester. Some challenges we have, which are challenges every single person in this room has: limited resources. My office is a staff of 1 full-time person, an 11-month position, and 2 part-time graduate assistants. Along with the institutional support comes additional requests for programming, and we're not always able to accommodate all of the requests that come to us given our limited staff. This is a time commitment. We know that students have busy lives, and we're looking to build these lasting relationships with students. So it can be asking a lot of students to work with us, to come to our programming. It's a challenge. And we have a transient population, not just our students, but like I mentioned, we had 45 people go through Green Dot Facilitator Training, many of whom left before we could even launch our program on campus. And if anyone, like I mentioned, wants to become a facilitator, there's training involved. There's a 4-day training, and beyond that training, someone has to be comfortable enough with the material to start going out and providing this information on their own. So when we have a transient population where we're constantly finding trainings to send people to, looking for opportunities to give them to practice to get them up to speed. Working with graduate assistants, they really anchor our program. We could not do this work without them. But we are lucky to work with graduate assistants for 2 years. We actually have a student who's been with us for 3 years, and that's really incredibly exciting for us. And she will be with us for a while, but that is certainly not the norm when working with students. How am I doing on time, Elva?
1.5 more minutes.
Okay, perfect. I would like to read you something. This is actually a post that we got on our Facebook page, and it's something that I look to on particularly challenging days, on those days when I feel like I have no idea what I'm doing. I don't know if what I'm doing is actually working. This is a message we received after our week of welcome programming, and this student has actually given us permission to share this with as many people as possible, is what she said. I am a student at WSU. Last weekend, as I was walking home late at night after the football game, my ex-boyfriend was waiting for me in the parking lot of my complex. He confronted me very intoxicated and very pissed off. He was verbally abusing me and threatening suicide and screaming vulgar slurs, but also physically stopping me from going to my apartment. A man saw what was happening and came by. He said he just had Green Dot training and that he was intervening and not leaving until this was resolved and I was home safe. I have never been more grateful in my life. This man was very calm, tried what he could to reason with my ex-boyfriend, and ended up calling the cops. By the end of the night, my ex-boyfriend had forced himself into my apartment, and that's when the cops showed up. If that man had not intervened, called the cops, and they didn't show up when they did, I do not know what would have happened. I did not get the guy's name that night because I had to talk to the police. But I wanted to say how grateful I am to Green Dot and to that man for how well that night turned out. It could have went so badly, but I will forever be in debt to that man. And also for what Green Dot represents, because it made that man take notice of a situation and want to intervene. When my ex-boyfriend was screaming at me, no one came by. I am sure people heard from their apartments. But nobody cared until that guy happened to be walking by. I just wanted to let you know that this program makes a difference. Thank you. I get a little choked up every time I read that. I've been working with this program for 2.5 years now, and I really truly feel very strongly about this program, and the students that we work with also tell us that it's made a tremendous impact in their life. So that is it for me. Thank you very much.
Hi everyone. So just to give you a reminder, my name is Plewa. I work at Western Washington University, which is up in Bellingham, Washington, beautiful part of our state. And I work in prevention and wellness services. And to give you a little more context of what I do up there, I specialize in violence prevention, and I run the CASAS office, which stands for Consultation and Sexual Assault Support. And in that role, I provide emotional support to students who've experienced any sort of dating violence, sexual violence. And I also have the wonderful benefit of doing a lot of outreach, prevention, teaching, and training, and I work with a group of student volunteers to promote some of these messages that we're trying to spread. So I'm very lucky to have a great balance between response and prevention in my job. I find that it's really refreshing at times. So that's a little bit more about what I do. Let me tell you a bit more about Western. We have a little under 1,500 students, or I'm sorry, 15,000. 1,500 would be very tiny. 15,000 students. We do not have a football team. That was actually taken away a few years ago. And we have no Greek life presence. There's no fraternities or sororities. We do have quite a few students living on campus, so sort of a traditional campus, not much of a commuter campus. And we do have a wide number of varsity athletic teams and club sports. So we use that as sort of our target audience when we do any sort of prevention programming, whether it's violence prevention, sexual health, alcohol and other drugs, etc. So I want to tell you a little bit about how we're moving forward with bystander intervention. We don't have Green Dot, and currently we don't have a very well-structured ongoing program that we're implementing, but we've been doing an incredible amount of work to be very intentional in the program that we are planning to implement and in creating our outline. So I'd like to tell you a bit about that. So in the past, our bystander intervention programs were really focused on this see something, say something approach. So scenarios talked a lot about like if you're walking home and you see a couple arguing and then they start yelling and now they're using offensive language towards each other. How do you intervene? How do you do that effectively? Which is super important to talk about those scenarios and to build skills in relation to those types of scenarios. But we found when we were implementing these trainings and these programs with students, they really weren't quite getting it. We weren't seeing that they were bought in. They weren't invested to intervening. It was sort of like they were sitting here in this program, checking the box that they were there and moving forward. So we didn't feel like we could trust them to intervene in potentially dangerous or risky situations. So we realized we really need to shift our focus. We don't want to just preach to the choir, to the students who are passionate about this. We've got to get everyone on board. So we shifted from teaching skills of intervention to really empowering students to create a safer community, and with that, realizing that they have a responsibility to their community to at least be intentional in the ways they're creating a safer campus overall. And this is really based in the social ecological model. So teaching students and encouraging them to recognize that as an individual, you're part of this community and you have an influence on it. And naturally, you have an influence on society as a whole. So sort of starting there. And this is based on a lot of research and a lot of different models. Elva's going to pass out one of them to you. We started with the sexual violence continuum, and some of you might be familiar with this. What this shows is that basically attitudes and beliefs are the foundation for all our behaviors, good or bad. And when we look at sexual violence in particular, we see that oppression, sexism, racism, etc., really act as the foundation of these behaviors. So we need to start there when we're looking at getting students on board with intervening. So this sexual violence continuum makes a lot of sense to me, because when we see that if we have a society that's really normalizing sexism, for example, then naturally students are going to express that verbally. And that's when we see things like catcalling on the street, sexual harassment, telling rape jokes, etc. And if they continue to receive messages from the larger culture, from their fellow students, that those behaviors are okay, that's when we see folks expressing these attitudes and beliefs behaviorally. And that's when we go up the continuum and see intimate partner violence, sexual assault, rape and murder, things like that. So not only does this provide a wonderful map for all of these ways that we can intervene, but it really highlights that we have to start earlier in terms of intervention. We've got to get students gaining some more awareness into their own attitudes and beliefs and taking responsibility for where they are on this continuum of oppression. So that's sort of where we started. And there's a lot of other research that shows how you can effectively prevent violence. And there's a study done by Gerald Stein in 2007 that I refer to quite often. And this cites quite a few different other research studies as well. But in this article, it explained that in order to effectively prevent violence, we have to look at gender stereotypes and we have to look at sexual assault myths. So this really relates to what we heard from the keynote speaker, and that we've got to target these misperceptions. And so we're really going to focus on that in our current programming. We find that when students or when anyone believes in sexual assault myths or misperceptions related to violence, they're more likely to be hostile and violent, they're more likely to be victim blaming, and even they're at higher risk for perpetrating sexual assault. So this is a really big deal, and we've got to do a better job of confronting it. So that's sort of the foundation of how we developed the direction. I'm going to tell you a little bit about our current programming and the main focuses of it. So the first, as I mentioned, is confronting myths. And the way that we're doing this is asking students a lot of questions. So asking them something like, what does the typical rapist look like? Time and time again, when I ask this to students, they say, it's a creepy person who drives a van, who's in the dark. And they actually say these things. And so that tells us that this stranger rape myth is still very widely accepted and well known across campus, even though most of us realize that sexual assault and intimate partner violence is obviously perpetrated by someone you know and care about. So asking questions like that. We also want to ask about consent. There's a myth that there's a gray area of consent. And students, we will get into very long conversations about this. Students will say, well, it depends. You know, there's the situation that I want to throw out there, and can't you see that sometimes it just depends. It's not black and white. It's not clear. To me, consent is very clear. Either it was present or it wasn't. So we provide the definition of consent, and then we're asking students, in these different scenarios, was consent present or not? Could this be defined as sexual assault or not? And having them work through this together, and then giving them some very clear educational points for them to recognize there's absolutely no gray area of consent. So those are just some examples of how we're confronting myths and misperceptions. The other point here is that we've got to be more inclusive in our programming, and I encourage you all to think about what this looks like on your campus as well. Of course, violence against women is a problem. Violence against men is a problem too, but there are a lot of other gender identities that we're not talking about, and we have to do a better job of increasing dialogue about these communities. So for example, statistics show that up to 64% of individuals who identify as trans have experienced sexual assault at some point in their lifetime. That's a huge statistic. So we've got to take more time and space to talk about these marginalized identities, people who are non-conforming to the gender binary. So of course the third component is skill building, but we're doing this in a different way. The way we're doing this is talking about these common sort of day-to-day interactions that you may have with friends, family members, and other students on campus, really confronting these problematic attitudes and beliefs that perpetuate violence. So scenarios might focus more on you're with your friend and that person tells a rape joke. How do you have a conversation with them about that, or how do you confront that? Or you're watching a news story about a woman being sexually assaulted and someone says, oh, well, I guess she deserved it. Some sort of victim blaming statement. So really having students think about how do we open up these difficult conversations with the people that we care about. And really this is the way that we can start to implement change. We've just got to get them on board with that. So we're going to have them practice that in our current programming. And the final aspect, of course, is getting men on board. And you've already heard a bit about this, but we know that most men are not violent, but also most men aren't part of preventative efforts. So we've got to find ways to get more of our male students on board with this, to increase their commitment and investment to this cause. And one way we're doing that is by being non-confrontational. We're not pointing the finger at one gender in particular, we're actually pointing it at everyone. Everyone's got the responsibility to be more aware of their attitudes and beliefs and to recognize how that impacts our community. So we're hoping that by taking that non-confrontational approach, we'll get more of the male-identified students on board with us. So as we move forward, we have a couple of plans. The first is to work on assessment. How are we going to do this effectively? How are we going to get some data before and after to make sure that this is working? We're hoping to start in the residence halls, because that's a pretty good built-in population where we can begin this programming, and we have really close relationships with them already. But we'd like to increase relationships with other folks on campus, increase this programming with our varsity athletics, have more time to do that. And we're really excited to know that institutionally our efforts are supported, and I think this makes a big difference in all prevention programming. Without institutional support, it's kind of a shallow effort. But more and more students are seeing that violence prevention efforts are very visible on campus and that there's a lot of energy going towards it. For example, my office, CASAS, we have permanent posters installed in every single bathroom across campus. And this took a lot of partnerships with other departments to get this going. But I'm really excited that that's there, and that shows students that there's support on campus, that we don't tolerate violence, and we're doing something about it. So we'd like to increase visibility in those ways. So we're really excited about this new movement, and we're shifting from calling it bystander intervention to bystander empowerment. We really want students to be empowered, to get involved, and to feel a responsibility to their community. And we're very excited to see how this turns out, and I'm excited to utilize our 90 peer health educators to promote these messages as well. Thank you.
Hello again. As Nikki said, I'm going to try to not do anything stupid while I'm standing up here because I usually need to have something to rest my hands on or stand behind or PowerPoint to at some times look at, and so I can shift my gaze, so I'll just apologize for that right now. As I said before, my name's Andrea Eastlick. I serve as the Assistant Director of the Wellness Center at Central Washington University. Central Washington University, for those of you that may not know, is located right in the center of the state. However, and I'm a transplant to Washington State from the state of Michigan, but next year I will have been here for 10 years, so I sort of consider myself a local to Ellensburg at this point. But having said that, I'm like, we're in the center of the state, so it's Central Washington, but apparently it's the eastern side of the state, because once you get on the other side of the mountains, everything is the east side of the state. So we are located, like I said, right in the center of the state. The closest institution to us is not very close, so some schools, being over here in Seattle, even having community colleges near to them, we don't have that necessarily. Yakima Valley Community College is fairly close, but it's one of the only ones. And the Ellensburg campus is our main campus. We have right around 10,000 students. That might vary a little bit right now. But we also have a number of branch campuses that are located in various areas around the states, or that are our centers that we have. The attendees of those centers are typically upper class students continuing with their education. I, like Nikki, also utilize Green Dot on our campus, and the first facilitator, I've been through 2 facilitator trainings. The first facilitator training that I attended was right here at the University of Washington, and it was spring of 2008, and we launched pretty quickly afterwards in fall of 2008. So we are currently in our 7th year of implementation at CWU, which is pretty exciting for us. I am, again, much like Nikki's challenges, one of the only people that remains on campus. The following spring in 2009, we hosted a facilitator training, and we had probably about 20 individuals from CWU that attended, and then afterwards we had, I think, less than 5. And we knew that going in, though, as well. We wanted people to be there to go through the facilitator training, really to understand what the program was, and that was part of our buy-in. Part of having them there wasn't necessarily to plan on them being facilitators with us throughout the school year. It was to help us be able to spread the message on campus later on and help us in supporting it with the students. My background has not always been in the prevention piece, and really specifically not in bystander intervention. I've been in the field for about 13 years. I started when I was a college student back in Michigan. Under the direction, or I guess mentorship, of Stephen Thompson. If anybody is familiar with who he is, he's done a lot of profiling for the FBI and has just done a lot of work in the field of violence prevention and especially response. So when I started, I was an advocate for a student group on campus, and we operated a 24-hour crisis response line, and so we were trained as advocates to accompany students at our institution to go to the hospital and have a forensic exam done, or accompany students and go to the police department if they wanted to make a report. And that was very different for me, making the shift coming out to Washington and learning about this prevention thing, like, oh, we can take a step back and we can look at why is it happening in the first place, and we can actually prevent it from occurring at all. And because all of my training and education had been in, no, we just need to support the victims and respond and support them in whatever way we can, it was very different for me. So I have an interesting perspective, I think, sometimes in looking at this. But Green Dot, for me, when I learned about it, really shifted that in an important way, because for those of you that are in the field, and sometimes I like to say, like, in the trenches with us and do the advocate work, and even if you don't understand that this is a field that it's extremely easy to get burnt out in, and there's a lot of turnover in it simply because of the stories that we hear of the students that we work with, and just watching them experience what they do. And this program was, for me, I like to say that I think each one of us has a fire that burns inside of us, and mine was barely at a flicker at that point. I had been in the field for a number of years, and I'm like, I don't know how long I can do this on, you know, a permanent basis. Maybe I'll always volunteer somewhere, but I was getting to the point where I just didn't know how much longer I could do it on a professional basis or full time. And Green Dot for me was that one that turned that flicker into an inferno for me, because it put it, the way that it communicates the message was so, it just resonated with me so much, and that's what we found out that has happened with our students as well. The research behind it, like Alan was talking about this morning, the social norms data, the perpetrator data, the information that we know about bystanders intervening or not intervening because of the barriers that exist within us as human beings, that stuff has been around for a very, very long time. So the creator of this program wasn't doing anything new necessarily. She just figured out how to put it in a package that people could relate to, and that it was easy for them to do something with. And that's what I really appreciated about it. When we implemented the program back in 2008, we Central did it as a result of a statewide effort. So I, for the last number of years, have served on a statewide coalition, which is the Washington Sexual Violence Prevention College Coalition. If anybody can state that just like I did without making mistakes, I challenge you to do it. But I've, along with Melissa Tumis, who's here at University of Washington, and Barbara Maxwell, who is over at Whitman, and most recently Jonathan Grove, who is going back into continue his education, was at PLU. The four of us for the last number of years have really sort of been together in trying to keep that group alive and being able to support each other within the state. And so back in 2008, we looked at bystander programs and we said, can we figure out something that we can support as a state so that we can all come together and have a shared vision? And Green Dot is what we chose. We looked at a couple at the time, and it was just the one that we chose then. And since then, we've had a number of other schools get on board with us, so it's been really exciting. And one of the things I want to mention about choosing something just as a state to implement, and not that that has to be it, but one of the benefits is that you do have that shared vision. And I can call up a lot of my colleagues within the state, or even in other states that I know from back when I was in undergrad, that have implemented or are doing similar things, and say, hey, what did you do with this? Or how did you deal with this challenge that came up for you? And it's been phenomenal, because when you are a single person at an institution, and even though you may have the institutional support, but your day-to-day responsibilities and duties are, you're the one that is doing most of it. That's really, really helpful. Our office in the Wellness Center, violence prevention and response is not the only thing that we do. So that's been a challenge for us, is if I could do this full time and that was my only responsibility, I would absolutely love it. Or if I could have a staff member that I could dedicate to that, that would make my career some days, I say. But we don't, unfortunately, have that possibility. So we do with what we can. In the last couple of years that we've lost some of our facilitators that we've had trained, one of the constants that we've had is support and participation from our local domestic violence and sexual assault agency, which is called Aspen, and they provide support for everybody in our entire county. So Kittitas County, they provide services for. And Rachel, who was there, she has been my co-facilitator for about the last year or two, and then one of my professional health educators that's in the Wellness Center also was a co-facilitator. And so I'm super excited to start this year. There's 3 of us. You know, we've been doing it for a while. And then 2 weeks ago was my health educator's last day in the office, because she came back over here to Seattle to work at Microsoft. And Rachel called me 2 days ago and said she's moving back home to Tri-Cities to work for DSHS. And I'm like, no, what's happening? So there's going to be challenges along the way with whatever program institutions choose to implement. But again, the good thing is that I know that I still have support among the others within the state that are doing the same or even similar programs. So keep that in mind. If you ever feel like you're alone, if you're not part of the coalition, get a hold of me after this meeting, or I can give you my contact information. But look for others that can support you, especially if you feel like you're the only one, because there's a lot of us that are out there. It's just a matter of making those connections and continuing the network. Just to highlight a couple of the successes that we've had is, much like Nikki as well, we also talk to all of our incoming first-year students. Because of being in the Wellness Center, there's a lot of topic areas that we are charged with discussing with our first-year students. So from the very beginning, even before I've been in that office, we have been fortunate to have a mandatory session during Welcome Weekend right before students start class in the fall. And that's always been a Green Dot program ever since we've implemented it. So we're going into our 7th year that potentially every single one of our students have had at least an hour introduction to what the program is, and hopefully empowering them to understand and recognize what their part in reducing the numbers on our campus are, and whatever communities they're a part of for that matter. We also do the bystander trainings. We try to do at least 1 a quarter, if not more, just depending on the date and then what also facilitator availability is. I got a phone call in April, and so I have been asked on a Monday afternoon to go and talk to the women's softball team about an alcohol incident that had happened over the weekend. And I said, what time do you need me to be there? It's like, I don't know, 9 in the morning on a Monday. And she said, can you be here at 5? I said, sure, yeah, I'll be there, because that's what we do. And so we went, and then later on in the day, I got a call from the head athletic trainer and said, hey, would you be able to come to our all-staff meeting tomorrow morning at 8 and talk to all of the athletic staff about just the Wellness Center and what they do? And I said, yeah, okay, sure, yep, I'll be there, because again, that's what we do, and when you have an opportunity to talk to a population like that, you just don't turn it down. So I'm thinking, okay, what can I talk about? And so I had probably 10-15 minutes the next morning to talk to the entire athletic staff, and one of the things I always talk about is Green Dot, just because it's a huge passion of mine, and I think that we've made a big difference on our campus with it. And so I probably, I don't know, talked maybe 2-3 minutes about what the program was. And I think it was a day or two later, I got a phone call from our head football coach, which was brand new to campus at the time. And he said, hey, that Green Dot thing that you talked about, I thought that sounded really cool. And it's one of the first programs in terms of violence prevention that somebody has mentioned that actually sounds like it could help our guys. It doesn't sound like it talks to the men about, what not to do and, stop being terrible people and all of the messages that he had heard from previous programming before. And I said, well, that's great, because no, it doesn't do that. It's actually the opposite of that, and that's one of the many reasons that we really like it. And so I said to him, I had to kind of stop in my discussion with him, because I was a little taken aback. I never thought I would get that phone call ever in my career. And I said, Ian, I really need you to understand that I've been doing this work for a very long time. And your phone call, the fact that you approached us and said this is something important to you that you want your guys to know, is literally one of the biggest highlights of my entire career. And he was like, really? Wow. And it truly is. And so we know that it's had an impact on our campus. Since April, we have trained, I think, 80% of the football players at our campus, which has been phenomenal. And one of the things that I want to mention about that kind of goes along with some of the things that Alan was saying this morning is the importance of talking to men and how we talk to them. I'm obviously a female. My co-facilitator at the time was a female from my office as well, but we were the only ones that were certified and trained and allowed to do it. So that's what we had to go with. And I called one of my friends who I've known since undergrad back at Central Michigan University, where I started this work, and he's done over the last number of years a lot of work with violence prevention on military bases over in the East Coast. And I said, Steve, how can I tailor this? How can I customize this? I don't want to put them on the defensive. Like, we're already at a disadvantage. We're two women trying to talk to a group of men, and I want to make sure I don't say the wrong thing, and I want to make sure that I can keep them engaged, and what do I do? And I'm talking about the different slides, and well, can I change this, and can we incorporate different quotes that are, maybe from the athletic field instead of, the general quotes that are in the presentation and the training, and freaking out about it. And he said, Andrea, they're student athletes, but they're also human beings. And being a man is also just one part of their identity. And if you customize it and tailor it so much, especially to being a student athlete or whatever other part of their identity that somebody has, once that's no longer part of their life, what do? And they might go, well, that thing, and it was all about me as a student athlete and what I can do in that position or in that role. And now that I'm not, and I'm out of school, and that's not a part of my life, how do I do this thing? And I have to say that in 7 years, the football groups that we have had were by far the best groups of students that we have had in that training. The information that they shared with us, the stories that they discussed that were pretty difficult for a lot of them to share was absolutely remarkable. And it again shifted something for me to say we have to be able to look at this in a little different way and kind of, I don't want to say throw away, but kind of throw away some of the things that within the field we've been doing for a long time that is just because it's like, well, this is how we've always done it. When I got introduced to Green Dot, and because before then my experience had really just been in the advocacy part, there's a lot of things I was given permission to let go of. And even just terminology that we've used or things that we know haven't worked, but we just continue to do them. It's like, if they don't work, let's stop doing them. So the bystander intervention piece for me and for Central has been huge in the last 7 years. And it's something that we're going to continue to do for as long as we're able to. And I met one of Nikki's colleagues at a regional health conference 2 weeks ago over here in Seattle, and he was telling me about the DOJ grant. When I started I've been at Central for almost 10 years, but I've been in the Wellness Center for 7. And the first year that I was there, actually within the first 3 months that I was there, I was charged with writing this DOJ grant. And I've never written a grant in my life, never even looked at a grant application before that. And if anyone's familiar with the Department of Justice grant applications, they are not simple. And so I was like, okay, and pulling all this stuff together, and of course we got declined for it. And so I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never applying for a grant again. We've since got a couple of more, not in the same field, but it's increased our attitudes about grant writing. But knowing even that we've done Green Dot for a very long time, and knowing like, oh my gosh, there was another school within our own state that wrote a grant that they have somebody dedicated to just doing this work, because on our campus it really has grown that much that we're at a point where we probably need somebody dedicated just to do the violence prevention, intervention, and response work on our campus versus having one of our professional health educators dedicated to doing that on top of the alcohol and other drugs and the stress management and the mental health prevention and promotion pieces of things. So yeah, that's what I got.
I'm going to take the mic and sit over here because my notes are in front of me. As I was introduced, my name is Joel Pérez. I serve as the Dean of Students for Community Life at Seattle Pacific University. A little bit about our institution. We're obviously here in Seattle in the neighborhood of Queen Anne, not too far from here. 3,300 undergraduate students, about 900 graduate students, so under 5,000 is our student population. We are a faith-based institution rooted in the Free Methodist tradition. 51% of our students are residential. We have a 2-year residency requirement. Most of our students are, most of our undergraduate student population is traditional age, 18 and 21. We are a dry campus, and so also an NCAA Division II institution. So that's Seattle Pacific University. Just to give you some context of the work that I do, or how the population I work with. I'm in my 2nd year in my role as Dean of Students. This work really, for me, came in my new role as Joel. We need someone to help coordinate some of this stuff. We got some legislation that's been happening. We haven't been necessarily in compliance. We need to get in compliance. Can you provide some leadership in this? Small school, those of you who work at small schools know you wear a lot of hats. You interact with a lot of different people. And so really took it on. So we knew we needed to do something around bystander intervention training. Some of it we knew because we felt like we should. The others, there was federal mandate coming from VAWA particularly. And so we looked around and started talking to people. Our athletic department had been using the Step Up program. So I took a closer look at that and decided a group of 4 of us would go to the Step Up training. And Step Up is a program that was designed by the NCAA in partnership with the University of Arizona, particularly targeting athletics, abuse of alcohol, hazing, and those kinds of things initially, and has since branched out and really helps address a lot of issues. And the idea is to get students, athletes, participants to step up and stop something from happening that they have may not necessarily know how. So it's a skill building program. And so it's based really on a lot of what was talked about this morning, but in particular the C model, which is safe responding, early intervention, effective helping. So when I was charged with trying to figure out what to do, we knew we had a couple different options that we could possibly go with. One was a face-to-face presentation style where we would meet with students and present the information. The other is an online version that some of our
some of my colleagues at other larger institutions was using, given the fact that when you have a large commuter population, not all residential, that those could work as well. We decided to go with the face-to-face model, and hence the step-up training. And so we all went to Kansas City, Missouri, I think earlier this year, and I believe it was June, and we got certified. And we knew we needed to come back and present this to, I need to present it to my boss, the vice president, and get buy-in. And we knew, again, that we could have a few different models that we would potentially use. We decided to go at it and try to present it in the classroom through our university seminar program, or our first-year experience program. And so I met with our vice provost and had a very good conversation. I initially thought I was going to get some resistance, and it did not. We knew we needed to do it, and so she was all for it. Email went out to the faculty that teach in the USEM program. I then came in and did a presentation with the faculty about the program itself, and they all knew they needed to set aside class time for this to happen. And so that's how we've been delivering it. This is our first year, so it's new. I don't have a lot of data other than we're doing it. I do plan on doing some assessment, probably 3 to 4 months out. A lot of the assessment tools that actually Step Up has developed we'll put to use. And so far, the reaction's been extremely positive. We started primarily initially doing it with our RA as far as RA training, hall council training, and then we rolled it into the classroom. So all first-year students are going through the program. Courses meet throughout the first quarter, so we have one going tomorrow, and so every week we have several options. And so the 4 of us came back and trained all of our residence life staff, so the hall directors as well as student activities folks, multi-ethnic programs, and so we developed a pool of people that we could draw from, so it wasn't just 4 of us trying to manage 32 sections of the university seminar. And so we've been able to do that, I think, quite effectively. Some early response, like I said, has been really, really positive. Faculty have actually really enjoyed it. Faculty, for the most part, sit through the presentation as well. So it could be lengthened just like Green Dot can, or shortened. We do a 75-minute presentation. You can go as long as 3 to 4 hours, depending on what you want to do, which population you're doing it with. And so far, the response has been extremely positive, both from faculty, students, and those of us who are delivering the model or the program. And so challenges, of course, is the funding. We had some funding that we had. We fine our students for alcohol and drug violations, part of the sanctioning process to pay for either alcohol EDU. I came in and there was a large sum of money that hadn't been being used because we have to use it very much around alcohol education, prevention, those kinds of drug, alcohol, and prevention, and those kinds of things. And so I was able to tap into that to send us to Kansas City for certification and come back and been able to use some of those dollars to do the training, as well as some other materials that we've had to purchase. And so it's allowed us also, I think, for our staff who delivers the program to get them into the classroom. So there's that faculty interaction that has been really helpful for us in student life, building those bridges with academic affairs. And it's been, again, I think it's worked well for us. It starts off by setting it up, so we have 90 minutes during orientation weekend to set it up, in that we deliver, of course, the normal stuff that has to be delivered with new students. But we talk about bystander intervention things, we talk about consent, we talk about what's going to be happening in the USEM courses, and that led us to set up how we've been delivering. And so that's where we're at. If you want more information with Step Up, it's not necessarily great for everyone. It worked for us. The training is 1.5 days. They do it every other year. So this is an off year. This last year I said was in Kansas City. The program could be tailored to your context, which we've done. We're a very unique campus compared to the folks here that presented with me. And it's worked for us. Will it work for you? I don't know. I think it's something that we really have enjoyed doing. Initially, there was a lot of like, well, will it work? Will it not work? This face-to-face thing. Let's do online. And I said, no, let's do face-to-face because it works within our context. We are highly, residential campus. We have a lot of touch points with students. This is another touch point for us with students. And so that's been really effective for us. You can get more information on stepupprogram.org if you want to get some more. Most NCAA institutions have access to the curriculum. It's promoted by the NCAA. And so that was a partnership between us and the athletic department. Our area is fairly small. I'm on the same team as our athletic director, so we're having these conversations on a regular basis. And so that made it a lot easier. We are considering delivering it or going to a peer-to-peer model for some things, and that's come out of our student government being really wanting to get more active with bystander intervention. And so they've gotten really on board with this, so we're exploring that. We will be delivering it again next year through the USEM program. At SPU, we have another year with our university seminar program. It's probably going to go away. So we're going to need to get creative on how we're going to deliver what we need to deliver and where we want to deliver it. So those are some things from SPU that we're doing. Thank you for your time, and then I think we're ready to take any questions that you might have.
Does anybody have questions for our panel? I got one hand right here.
Yeah. The lady from Western Washington, I forgot your name, I apologize.
That's right.
Talked about the exact definition of consent, and there's not any blurry line. It never said exactly what it is that you use with the students. What is the exact definition that you guys use when you're talking about definition of consent?
Sure. We define consent as an enthusiastic yes, something that's freely given, can be revoked at any time, should happen every single time, and should be done under no impairment of alcohol and other drugs.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes.
I have a question for you regarding how to reach commuter students. We talked about populations like the residence hall population in the community. We talked about athletes. I work at a community college with about 14,000 commuter students, which is difficult to engage in general, but especially difficult to engage in this topic. I'm curious if you've had any success in working with commuter students, and if you can share any insights that you have.
Well, I'll start. One thing that we're shifting to is using EverFi's Safe Haven and Alcohol EDU modules. So that's an online program. We used to use a program that we created in-house, and it wasn't as comprehensive, but we've shifted to use this wonderful online tutorial that every student will have to take, or they can't register for their classes. So in terms of reaching students, that's where we're starting. Other panelists might have ideas about how to get that face-to-face contact.
Can you say that again, please? The program name?
Sure, it's EverFi Safe Haven.
EverFi, EVER-FI, and they also do alcohol EDU.
How much does that cost per student?
It's a great question.
It's not a per student, it's an institutional cost. That's one of the great things about it.
It's based on your your size of your student population. So if you've got 1,000 new students and you're running it through, then it'll be a certain cost, and it'll go up as it gets larger.
Yes.
In talking about the efficacy of these bystander interventions, how do you reconcile that the more awareness you create, the more reports you tend to see? I mean, at least is what we're experiencing. So on the face of it, the numbers might seem like we're really not having an effect at all. So how do you sort of reconcile that efficacy question?
I think that's a hard one. I think for people that, for myself anyway, that have been like in advocacy roles, I say like, oh my gosh, we have more people that are coming forward, knowing that historically it's something that is so underreported anyway. But still at the same time needing to justify to other people and say like, but now we have more people coming forward, and it just looks worse for our numbers that are looking on the websites and saying like, why all of a sudden did this shift? And I think it's just a matter of educating the people on your campus about it and explaining that and saying this isn't, Alan was talking, it's not necessarily a bad thing, it's just understanding why are those numbers increasing. And so, I mean, just since I've been in the Wellness Center for the last almost 8 years, when I started, I think the number of just even referrals that I got for the year was probably less than 10. And that's not even the number of students that I actually saw. That was just the number of referrals that came to me because, you know, of an incident report through Housing Arrest Life or something else. And I'm just thinking back in the spring report that I did, and this is still vastly under what we know actually happens, but I had 64 referrals and I met with half of them. And so, and that's been over the course of 7 years, and while I would like to see more students come in to see me, I wouldn't because I don't want them to experience that, but I know that there's other students that are being impacted, and I would love for them to know that our office is a resource and be able to feel comfortable to come in and actually seek that help. But I think what I think anyway, I think it's a matter of just educating the people on your campus and letting them know this is why we're seeing increased numbers, and it's a good thing that people are feeling more comfortable to be able to come forward with that information. And it's helping other students too. One, it lets them know that they're not alone. And I think that it sends a really powerful message that you're probably doing some really great things to change the climate on your campus so that they do feel comfortable.
Anecdotally, we've seen a tremendous increase in the number of reports to law enforcement, to our student conduct office, and of those coming to our community-based advocates. And I think it is really important. For example, we had 7 reports to the police or the university in a 2-week period, and our student newspaper ran a series of stories on this, and every person at the university that was interviewed was very aware of the fact that, or was very cognizant of the fact that this is not necessarily a bad thing. This does not necessarily mean that this is happening more. We should probably see this as a good thing. And much like Dr. Berkowitz said, we can't pinpoint which program we're offering that might be leading to this increase of people coming forward. But let's really see this as a positive. These are people who maybe 2 years ago, had this happen, would not have come forward, would not feel that they had the support that they needed to come forward.
We can also use information, so on a regular basis, so if anybody's familiar with the National College Health Assessment, we've also done internal surveys just based on this type of violence, so separate from that overall survey, is when we anonymously survey students and we see the number of students that say, yes, I've experienced this since I've been enrolled as a student just at Central, so not before they become college students, and look at that number and compare it to the number of students that we actually make contact with, there's still a really huge gap. So that's one of the ways too that you can say, okay, but the number of students that are being impacted still isn't even close to the ones that we know. And again, I think it's something to point out and say, it's just still very underreported, and it makes sense that there's not a lot still, or that they're increasing, but it's still not even close.
Go back to the question about commuter students. I just want to hear about a few other universities and what you all do to reach out to them.
We don't have anything specific that we do either. Our commuter Ellensburg is a very small town, and so even our commuter students are very close to campus. Not that they don't have different challenges or we need to reach them in different ways. We've just not really done any targeted outreach to them. We also have an online program that we utilize. We use the Campus Clarity program, this is actually the first year that we've used it, so we're still waiting to kind of collect all the data and see what the results of that were. But and we're right now only marketing it to all of our incoming students simply for cost and just to get to a place where we can get all of the students. But that's one of the ways too that we'll eventually be able to address all of our students, not necessarily certain pockets of them.
One option I know our branch campuses are exploring is to record in person some of the programs that we offer and then have that streaming online for anyone who can't actually make it to a program. And that's going to be far less cost prohibitive than some of the programs out there, which I don't know the exact amounts, but some of them can be quite expensive, especially if you have a large population of students.
Just a general question. I don't know, because it sounds like a lot of this training is a kind of a cultural shift around the mindset and so forth. And I'm wondering if any of you have experience in partnering with other organizations in your local community to do joint programming, so the message is not just to the students, but to the community as well, the sharing of resources or anything like that.
We have, so like I said, one of my co-facilitators for the last couple of years has always been somebody from our local agency, which was great for us. So like I said, Ellensburg is a really small town, and the 24-hour crisis response line that we use is Aspen, and a lot of their volunteers tend to be Central students, so we've just always had a really great, have always had a really great relationship with them. And so when we chose to implement Green Dot, we automatically just approached them and said, please, can we continue this? And it's just on a different level or an additional level than what it was before. And we've worked to, one of the restrictions, or I guess challenges with Green Dot is that from when they started, there's a number of different levels now. So there's a college training, there's a high school training, it's down in the middle schools now, and there's also a community training. And so when we got certified, it was just to address the college population. One of the reasons is because the difference in language that we use, even from college just down to high school, and then high school down to the middle school level. And so, in order for them to get trained to, or for me to get trained to disseminate that information or those trainings to the community of Ellensburg, we'd have to go through an additional training to, again, it's the understanding of it's a different population, and so the scenarios that you talk about are different. The language that you use is different, and we're just not there yet. It's something that we've talked about for quite a while, actually, since the beginning of when we implemented. Their staff, again, we're a really small community. They tend to have a lot of turnover too. It's just something that we haven't been able to get to yet. But there's a lot of communities in different states, and probably in Washington, that do as well. I know that the state of New Jersey happens to be one of the states that has utilized Green Dot for a long time, and I think they're one of the states that they're more prevalent in their community-based organizations than they are in the education setting.
Yeah, the University of Idaho, one of the really cool things that they do, one of their Green Dot facilitators is a member of the police department. So that's pretty cool, I think, that they have that support from law enforcement in doing this programming.
I sit on a couple different committees in the community, so I think that's a really important way to create connections and maintain them. And one of the committees that I'm on is targeting bystander intervention in middle schools right now. So we've created this great partnership where they're using our expertise, and they would like to use our peer health educators to do some of this bystander intervention training. They have decided to not go with Green Dot, and as I mentioned, we don't use Green Dot either. So it's great to partner up with folks to sort of combine forces and figure out how we're going to do this effectively. So I find that that's a good way to start creating connections.